Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Anjana Vakil. Anjana is one of the most viewed JSConf speakers and talks of all time, at around nearly 3 million views on YouTube. Anjana is a computational linguist and an expert in developer relations and functional programming. Anjana has been speaking at conferences for years and currently works as a developer relations/documentation consultant, and also has a number of interesting projects in and around supporting people in tech and outside. Anjana is one of the most intelligent, if not the most intelligent people I know. And this conversation is really a privilege to hear from her about the tech industry at large. We talk about transitioning careers from non-traditional backgrounds. Indeed, Anjana had a non-traditional background into the tech industry. And then we talk about the tech industry on a whole and how it can incentivize productivity, sometimes for the gains of maybe not the parties we expect, aka capitalism. We explore ideas around, is the dog wagging the tail or is the tail wagging the dog? Do we have it all backwards? Are we all being productive for what end to what means? It's a very insightful discussion that is somewhat philosophical, but still in and around the engineering space, the web space. And with that, I think fits the theme of this podcast very well, right? Interviewing world experts on topics in and around web engineering, but also who have takes on web engineering. I think this is definitely worth listening to. I'd love to offer this to all of you at no cost, but of course there are costs involved. And so to help cover those costs, especially since this is separate to my day job, let's take a moment and acknowledge the sponsors of this podcast. The Contagious Code podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters has a teaching style very similar to mine, where they teach you things like Git, Redis, Docker, even X. You can by having you make your own version of them. You literally create Git, Redis, Docker, or X, formerly Twitter, from scratch in a programming language that you know. In doing so, you get two benefits, really. You learn the programming language more intimately, and you learn the underlying mechanism behind these platforms by creating your own. It's really great. There's a free tier, but if you want a 40% discount when you start paying, use the link in the show notes. That is tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code podcast is also partnered with That Conference. That Conference is a multidisciplinary, inclusive, family-first tech conference that happens twice a year, once in Wisconsin, once in Texas. I've keynoted the Wisconsin conference and spoken at the Texas conference, and we give away free tickets for this conference. So if you want to enter a raffle to win a free ticket, just share this episode on social media and say, I'd like to win a ticket, to attend, and you may win one. Finally, the podcast is partnered with Stately.ai. Stately is a great way to visualize the flow of state and application logic through your application using state charts. You can do this using their excellent visualizer and then export it to code, that is JSON, and have the state machine sort of exist as code where you fill in the business logic that is the transitions between each state. If you'd like to give it a try, go to Stately.ai. Stately is also creating a framework, a library for agentic workflows that implement the actor model for AI-enabled applications. Again, if you'd like to give that a try, go to Stately.ai. Thank you so much to the sponsors and partners. And now for my discussion with Anjana Vakil. Anjana, so nice to have you on the podcast.
Hello.
I'm so excited.
It's lovely to be here. I feel like we're rarely in the same room at the same time. So even though we live in the same city, kind of.
Some people think we're the same person. I'm so happy you're here. And I'm sure all the listeners are excited to get to know you and get to know functional programming and how computational linguistics ties into DevRel and all of that. To get started, could you maybe give us an overview of your experience so far? And this, I need to be really clear that this sounds recruiter-ish. This is not recruiter-ish. This is not qualified.
My cover letter will say no. So I am one of those career changers, I guess you could say. I've been in tech since about, 2015. I decided to make it a full-time thing. Before that, I was studying computational linguistics, which I'm happy to nerd out with you about in a minute. And before that, I was working as an English language teacher, like English is a foreign language. And before that was in sales. And before that was in college for philosophy. And so I've just been one of those people that does not have a clear trajectory through life. I am more of a let's see where the wind blows kind of person, I guess. But yeah, the last however, I don't want to count how many years, it depends, on 2015 that I've been trying to do this full time. I started as a Python developer. I've been a JavaScript engineer, Python engineer, front end, back end, full stack. Been in DevRel, been in engineering, learning and development, so more organizational things. Just again, within my tech career, also as erratic of a history as outside of my tech career. And so, yeah, the last couple of years I've been working mostly, I would say, as a developer educator. So yeah, I guess once a teacher, always a teacher. I love teaching. I love sharing knowledge. I love helping people have that aha moment. And so, yeah, recently I've been working freelance with a few companies on their kind of developer experience, developer education, developer relations efforts, and also teaching folks JavaScript and web development and various other related concepts, functional programming being one of them that is
Nice.
sort of near and dear to my heart. And yeah.
Awesome. That's quite the breadth of experience. I want to get into all of it, especially nerding out about computational linguistics. We've talked about this off camera in some capacity, but I still don't know the full extent of it. I mean,
neither do I.
does Google Translate or default type? Anyway, we'll get into that.
Okay.
But before that, you mentioned
teasers.
You're a career changer.
Mm-hmm.
And this is foreign to me because like I've written code since I was a child, and in many ways, you know this, it chose me. And there's like, I was in like 10 years old. I was in 4th, 5th grade, and people going like, "Oh, you're going to be a programmer. You're going to." It's like prophetic, the prophecy of my life.
I see.
But for you, you were in sales, and then you did linguistics, and so on and so forth. How did you end up coming to tech? Was it purely because of the money? This sounds super baited.
No. I mean, first of all, that's a fair question.
Yes.
And I am in the camp of, I think it is a totally legit reason to get into tech, to want to provide for yourself and your loved ones, because it is a financially lucrative career, and because these days it is getting hard to get by even on a tech salary, in many big cities in the West anyway. But anywho, for me, it was more, I kind of followed my nose, I guess you could say. So I always loved languages. And that I ended up going back to grad school for computational linguistics, which is sort of the intersection of computers and human languages, and is a big umbrella term and encompasses a whole bunch of stuff, which we can dig into in a minute. But through doing that, the intersection being, needing to write code to, let's say, carry out research in how do languages work and how can computers help do human language better.
Right.
Like, for example, I was particularly interested in speech technology, so like speech recognition, and not just the massive data sets that are used to train things like Siri and Alexa and, so on and so forth, but also in how can we build language technology that's effective, not just for people who speak the maybe 24 languages that have like enough petabytes of data to train such a model, but also other languages and things like that, and trying to figure out, different ways that computers can tackle those problems. And in the course of doing that, I really kind of found that I liked the problem solving and the engineering side of building the software that I needed to do the research more than I liked actually doing the research and writing the papers and doing the academic thing. So that's how I kind of got the bug. And then the industry really opened up to me through 2 organizations that I talk about a lot, but today is going to be another time.
Let me guess. Recurse Center.
Boom.
And I don't know.
Oh, stay tuned. All right. So yes, the Recurse Center, which folks can find out about at recurse.com, is this amazing, I would call it a programming community. But it's also they have what they call a retreat. Mm-hmm. So sort of like a writer's retreat. It used to be exclusively kind of in person in New York City, but now, in this day and age, there's also virtual options. But this community, essentially, I found out about super randomly, and it's as an educator, it was like immediately interesting to me because it's a self-directed educational retreat. So instead of it being like a boot camp, let's say, for, you go for a certain amount of time and you take classes, and there are teachers or instructors and there are students and knowledge is kind of imparted in mostly one direction and that sort of thing. It's not like that at all. There's no curriculum, no classes, just a bunch of people who are at totally different stages of their programming journeys and want to improve, want to learn something new. It might be, in my case, I was coming out of like an academic context where I knew how to put, a few lines of Python together into a massive script or whatever, but I didn't know some of the underlying computer science. I knew things about like, in computational linguistics, there's a lot of intersection with what I would call the later phases of a CS curriculum.
Yeah.
So things like machine learning or different kinds of, embeddings and vector comparisons and all this stuff that's now trending on whatever.
You were dabbling in that before it was cool.
Before it was cool. No. But anyway, but I didn't have some of the real basics around like binary code. What is that? What is assembly? What is machine code? What is, all that stuff. So I was interested in that, but there were also people there who had decades of experience as professional engineers that were maybe interested in learning a new language or trying a totally different problem space in coding or doing something creative like building a video game or building a music synthesizer or something like that. And so it was amazing to me. And I think it kind of like really colored my expectations and kind of ideas of what tech could be because it was just this super empowering community of people that were all excited about tech and all excited about learning and learning from each other. So anyway, highly recommend checking out the Recurse Center.
Is that still open?
It is still happening. The really awesome thing about it too is that it is unlike a boot camp. Again, no curriculum, but also no tuition because there is no curriculum to charge tuition for. So the way they make money is by recruiting for companies that have a need for the kind of really self-motivated, curious, like driven people that tend to gravitate towards that community. So definitely recommend folks check it out if they're interested in taking, some time. I think you can do shorter terms like a couple weeks or 6 weeks or something now, up to 3 months is what it was when I was there back in 2015. But also to companies that are like, we just can't seem to find the right people that have this innate kind of like willingness to share what they know and learn from each other and not the egos and whatever that we sometimes, get a bad rap for as engineers. For due reasons. But anyway, so highly recommend those watching at home go check out recurse.com.
Interesting. So just to make sure I understand correctly, it's free. You can go there and study for up to 3 months at no cost.
I believe so. Check my math on the duration because it's changed a couple of times over the years. But
wow. And it's funded by companies who want to then get those people to...
So the way it works is if you're looking for a job after you do your batch, they call them, they have kind of a career center, career service where they will help you work on your resume and find appropriate jobs, whether or not they're from their hiring network. But there are a lot of awesome companies that are in their hiring network, and so they'll connect you with them. Some of them have also alumni of the Recurse program.
Go on to start companies and...
Yeah, some of them are started by recursors. Some of them already have recursors working there. And so you can get kind of a little bit of a inside look at how life is there. A lot of them are very kind of value aligned on these things like constant learning never stops, a lot of them are trying to do good in the world with code, that sort of thing. So it's really kind of a win-win-win because it's for those of us who have ever been in hiring positions or, tried to find like people who they may or may not have a kind of experience in the given tech stack or whatever, but they have the right mindset of being able to come into something without the ego of like, I already know everything I need to know, and without I'm going to learn things, but I'm not going to tell anybody about them because then I won't be as special in comparison to everybody else. So anyway, so companies that think that way, which I think are generally great companies to work for, tend to also kind of be in this network. So it's just a nice kind of, I don't know, a circle of life in the tech industry. So so that's, I didn't directly get a job through them, but that was my first kind of introduction to the professional industry of tech, meeting other people there who had been working in the field and not just, writing random scripts for their research papers like I had been.
Yeah.
And that's also where I found out that functional programming is a thing, which then I got really excited about, started talking a lot about, started doing conferences, which I think is how we know each other, is through the conference circuit.
Yeah.
And and so that led me to, through that community, the second organization that profoundly
I think I remember.
helped me get into tech.
I think I remember now. Outreachy.
Outreachy. Bingo. Outreachy.org for those who need a URL.
I promise I was not. I genuinely forgot. And then as you were talking, somehow the neurons connected, and I was like, wait, Recurse Center, Outreachy, these two are like a linked list when I hear you talk about it.
Yeah, and it was amazing because Outreachy, for those who haven't heard of it, is a really cool program that basically places people who are generally from underrepresented, underestimated groups in the tech industry. It used to be a program specifically geared towards women, but it has since opened up to basically anyone who is kind of starting from a disadvantage in the tech industry demographically. And it places them in remote paid internships working on open source projects.
Wow.
So, for example, I was an intern at Mozilla working on some testing infrastructure for Firefox or whatever back in the day. And but there's all kinds of other jobs. Like there were documentation jobs and community related jobs and product things and all kinds of different projects that you could work on. And it's really cool because essentially, especially back in 2016 when I did my internship, it was so hard, to get a foot in the door. I believe it's even harder at this current moment, this juncture in economies and the tech industry and whatnot. But it's just an amazing program that they have, 2 cohorts a year, basically. And as far as I know, it's still running. It's still open. You can apply every 6 months, basically. So outreachy.org. And what's amazing is that it is global.
Oh, so it's not just for Americans.
No, it is for the whole world. So there might be a couple of countries that they're not able to work with for legal reasons, but basically it has folks from all over the place. And so that's also an amazing way to meet people and get connected with just other projects that you might not have known about otherwise. It was fabulous. And for me, that was my first kind of professional experience as a software developer. Although, as I said, it's not exclusively for software developers. Yeah. And so from there, I was able to kind of see how it works to be on a real team and have real, things you need to ship and that sort of thing. And so between that and nerding out on stage a bunch about how much I love functional programming, that's kind of how I got in to the field.
This is so encouraging for me to hear. And I have no doubt that it will be for other people. Because at this point in time, like today, I have a friend who, I won't name him, but he's unhappily employed. He's an accountant, hates being an accountant. And this is not uncommon in Indian families. Like you have to be an accountant or an engineer, or you have to be something that you don't necessarily want to be. A lot of even my classmates growing up, their parents made them go to engineering when they didn't want to be engineers. But no,
I was supposed to go into medical field, research or doctoring or something. Yes.
And so now this friend of mine's found himself in a position where he, not only is he unhappy with his job, but he feels like a low amount of self-worth. He's like, what am I doing? I'm just day in, day out. I do this job. I don't really care about it. And then he hears me talk about my job. I get to talk to experts, all of this. I get to speak at conferences. I get to help, companies pay me ridiculous amounts of money per hour to tell them how to go to market. That's insane to him, and frankly to me. And so he looks at this contrast, and sure, comparison's a trap, but at some point we live in a social society. And so he goes, man, I feel like I want that. I want that meaning. And what I'm hearing from you is this is one possible way. You can go to the Recurse Center and learn new skills, and then Outreachy has almost this synergistic relationship with that, where you can immediately then pursue a paid internship.
Yeah, and they're not directly related as organizations. There just happens to be,
a synergy,
an intersection there. Yeah. But the concept of these groups. And I think conferencing also, for me, that was like hugely eye-opening, being able to, I started going to conferences on diversity scholarships, other kinds of community-oriented events that weren't so expensive to attend and that sort of thing. And that's also where I just met a lot of people that kind of opened my eyes to the different possibilities, things you could be working on, things you could be having as your day-to-day, like sitting down with people and nerding out about tech with them, that sort of thing. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I also didn't know computational linguistics was a thing until basically right when I went back to grad school for it.
Yeah.
But essentially, like, I don't know, I remember growing up and thinking, people would always ask you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which, again, in certain families, like Indian families, is a very small array of options you can choose from.
It's more like, which one of these do you want to be?
Which of these 3 or 4 paths do you want to go down? And but even if it was more open-ended, it's still sort of like, okay, pick a name of a profession and go into it. And I think what a lot of us are finding out, and I guess Gen Z kind of got a head start on this, of growing up in a world that was a little bit post those categorical assumptions, that this is, we're not just here to be cogs in economic machines. We are human beings. We're not machines. We're not gears. We're not processes. We're not programs. We are organic animals running around this crazy rock that happens to be flying through space at a particular distance from the sun that makes it habitable. That sort of thing. I think a lot of us, especially in the last few years with the pandemic, really calling a lot of our kind of life habits and choices and things like that into question. A lot of us are asking ourselves, like, okay, I've been living for these external motivating factors, like my family needs my support, or I need to be sending money back home, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those are all good reasons to do something like be an accountant, have a stable career, whatever it is. But and likewise, a lot of people might go into engineering, not because they love engineering, but because it's a stable career and it makes a lot of money and it can provide for, themselves and the people they care about. But I think now, there's also this awakening a little bit of kind of, is that all there is to life?
Yeah.
Kind of making ends meet, surviving, or do we have this opportunity, I guess you could say, silver lining wise, to look at, okay, we have this arguably finite time on Earth, whatever the Peter Thiels and whatever want to do about that.
So someone argues that?
No, I mean the billionaires that want to, make infinite blood regeneration or cryo.
I forget the name. There's this guy doing the super optimization of himself, Ben something, I think.
I don't know. Anyways, but aside from that,
we're all going to die.
I assume that we're all going to die. And so, we only have so much time. We only have so much energy. We only have so much, so much like we can give or we can take, I guess, depending how you look at it. And so I think, I don't know. I think that's something personally I learned, unfortunately, at a pretty young age by, having death of someone very close in my family. I think just from knowing you personally, I think that's also something that you had the unfortunate opportunity to reflect on very early on. But I think that, luckily for that, a lot of folks don't necessarily have that realization that early in their lives. And so, I don't know. I think it's important that we kind of be asking ourselves, like, what am I doing with my time? Like, yes, I'm providing for myself. Great, fabulous. First of all, and in this economy, that's not saying nothing. That is a huge win. But also, I think increasingly as it becomes harder and harder to play that economic game of success in the traditional, Western capitalist sense of the word, it'll become more important for us all to kind of ask ourselves, like, what are we doing? And is it what we want to be doing? And that might cause a lot of people to, for example, get out of tech. Like I've had my experiences with tech burnout, and like it is real, and you don't have to be in the industry for decades in order to run into it.
Try like a couple of years.
And it might also cause some folks to get into tech. It might also cause some folks to stay in tech, but to start looking for different types of work where it's not necessarily about working on like the fascinating technical problem. It's more about like building something that actually has an impact on the people around you, on your community, on people you care about, on,
Yeah.
on the world, as it were.
Yeah.
And so this is all to say, I think it's a perfectly appropriate time to be kind of questioning those career choices or other lifestyle choices. I've heard of so many people, leaving relationships, getting into relationships, changing where they live, moving countries or continents, all of this stuff. I think we're all kind of in this like collective soul searching moment. So it's kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, and I so appreciate you highlighting the avenues that people can use to do that.
Well, these are just this was my journey, right? And it's I always feel a little bit of two minds about sharing that because you can't replicate anybody else's life or experience. As you said, comparison is a trap, right?
But if you've had success using a hammer, then you give that hammer to
here
someone.
is a hammer that was able to successfully drive one nail at least. But yes, and I also think it's important to talk about these things because, like, I don't know, again, I entered tech through these type of programs, and that really colored my engagement, I would say, in the tech industry, whether it was like what I was advocating for as just a team member at a certain company or what kind of companies I was talking to and, trying to partner with as a external facing developer or advocate or whatever. It really kind of opened my mind to what is possible in the tech industry. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind, that like the tech industry as we know it and as we've seen it and as we see it today is not like the be all end all of what is possible with technology. Like, as with any other cultural endeavor, it is what we make of it. It goes where we collectively as a community and as an industry take it. So, it's up to us to ask ourselves, are we taking it in the right direction? And if not, what direction do we want to be taking it in? And I think organizations like Outreachy and the Recurse Center Outreach is more of a program than an organization, but that these type of entities are some of the ones that I have found the most inspiring in that front. Yeah.
That is so good. I like that you highlight the importance of asking the question, like, are we taking it in the right direction? Because we, as part of it, can take it in one direction or another. I'm going to take a risk. And I'm going to define, at least from my best perspective, what I think the right direction is.
Okay.
And I think it's very simple, to me at least. The right direction is the direction where it is the most adaptive for human flourishing.
Human flourishing. Okay.
Flourishing. Human health, well-being, etc. And so you look at to me, this is the right direction, not just for the tech industry, but for everything, right? Like if I eat too much and I end up getting some type of disease, this is clearly not the right direction for like nutrition, And I think similarly, if the industry is causing burnout, layoffs, people are sleeping in pods, and that costs $700 a month. I'm not even making that up.
No.
Is that the right direction? It doesn't seem like the right direction to me. But then the question is, what would be the right direction? And this is, I don't have an answer to that, but I guess it's someone in the comments will let us know.
Well, I mean, yes, it is, I don't think a solved problem. I think it is an open question, but I mean, I don't know. To me, I just always think at a certain point, it feels like, for example, you're, as a content creator, perhaps more familiar with this than I am, but when people talk about, what the algorithm wants, like the YouTube algorithm or whatever recommender algorithm, right? And doing things like to please the algorithm or, that sort of thing. Like at that point, it's sort of, we have the saying in American English, like the tail is wagging the dog. It feels backwards. Do you know what I mean? Because, I mean, if we think about technology and not like tech, like big tech or whatever, but just the word technology, like tools that we use to do things, whether it's a twig that a crow uses to like get some food out of a tree or whatever, or whether it's a hammer that we use to drive a nail, or whether it is a fancy cardioid microphone, whatever that we use to record amazing quality sound. They're supposed to be tools that serve our needs as organisms
Yeah.
trying to survive in this crazy world, you know?
Yeah.
And the feeling that I've gotten in it that has very much contributed to, you know, burnout and depression and anxiety and
Yeah.
all kinds of other psychological problems on my end, is that it starts to feel like we are living for
The machine.
to fit into the machine,
Yeah.
like for some other thing. And I think it's not even the machine in terms of the computer and its processor and whatnot, but this system, this hamster wheel, you know, whether it's capitalism or whatever you want to name that kind of churning that doesn't treat humans as, and not to get all philosophical with my bachelor's degree rearing its ugly head, but not to treat humans as a means to an end, getting a little Kantian for the philosophy nerds in the audience, but to treat humans as an end in themselves.
Right.
And that everything else that we're building, all these tools, should be a means to the end of helping humans or animals or the environment or what have you, nature, thrive, flourish, as you say. And it really feels like a lot of the tech that we build is almost the opposite. You know, it's almost geared towards getting us to put ourselves as ends, as worthwhile, inherently valuable entities, putting ourselves second, putting our loved ones second, putting people halfway across the world second, putting our entire planet second or third or 15th after these, like, what I would think of as kind of intermediary goals, like earning money or making $1 bajillion or being the next unicorn or getting in Forbes or whatever it is, you know? So I don't understand it, but it seems like, I hope on my optimistic days, I hope that, I think, you know, folks are starting to have that realization in the tech industry that we have a disproportionate amount of power to influence how that goes and what direction we take technology, these tools, and whether we treat them as the means or the ends, and whether we treat humans and animals and nature and the environment and all of it as a resource to be exploited and used up and then thrown away when it's no longer useful, or whether we treat those things as the ends in themselves and we make the computers work for us collectively as a planet, not the other way around.
Because I agree. I feel like right now, human beings are a means to the end of money.
Human resources.
Yeah. and so then what is the resource serving? And it has to be money. I feel like that's really problematic, and I don't know the solution to it. But
if you did, it would be a different world. So,
but what you're saying speaks to me on many levels. One of the levels is to my own sort of coming up in tech, because as mentioned, so for me, I started, like, I wrote my first line of code when I was, I don't know, 8. First internship at 15, first job at whatever, and I've been doing this way too long, to the point where people talk about me live coding at conferences, and they're like, how can you write code so easily on stage? I was like, how can I breathe on stage? I've been doing this, like, my nervous system formed around this, you know? But what my nervous system also formed around was toxic tech bro culture. I was weaned in, we have to ship at any cost. I was weaned in, I don't care if you're working nights and weekends. We need to get this out there. Look, and you know, when you say it like that, when you say human beings are a means to an end, it's very convicting for me, because I've treated people like that. I've been I've been the 10x engineer who I get a pull request and I'm like, you know, we have to ship this like in 2 days, right? What is it? And you know, I've done that, and it's, to my shame, I'll admit, only recently, like very very recently, where I learned anew. I've always known somewhere subconsciously that human beings are the end and not the means, but I've learned that in a very real way, and I've sort of become obsessed with this idea of honor, as in not having honor and having like a strong moral code, but showing honor to people. And this is where I feel like the industry fails miserably. We do not show honor to people because people are not sacred. There's there's some god on some throne somewhere that has nothing to do with humanity or human beings. And yeah, I don't know what to do about it. But I guess if change does start with one person, with us, I'm at least thankful that I'm on the right track.
Well, I mean, I think I think it starts with, and I mean, it has started and it continues with conversations like this, or, cultures in companies where the, so-called like brilliant a-hole is not honored more than the team player who doesn't necessarily always do the glamorous work, but does the legwork that needs to happen for everybody else to continue doing their thing. And so I think as you say, like, this idea of what do we honor, who do we honor, what do we put on a pedestal, what do we push down as like incidental or intermediary to the real goals. I think historically, and it's not just in the tech industry, but I think it's somehow very, very visible in the tech industry, that it's this toxic productivity, this idea that not only like, I don't care if you're working nights and weekends, but like, if you're not working nights and weekends, why not?
Yeah.
What's your problem?
What's your excuse?
Which, of course, coming in, like, for example, as a woman or as people of color, I think we also, there's various ways in which certain groups have been funneled into certain roles where it is harder for them to forsake their caretaking responsibilities or their responsibilities towards others, whereas other groups, white men, have been sort of conditioned to be okay with letting others care for them and be okay with taking all of that time and, really just focusing on their work.
The world's given it to you from day one.
So. Well, and I mean, this isn't trying to get into, making anybody feel bad about the color of skin they were born with or their, assigned gender at birth. But the idea that we can all, regardless of where we're coming from, regardless of where we're at, regardless of how much privilege we have, and we all have privilege, and we all lack privilege in different ways.
And we all get
in my
privilege is
worldview.
Dynamic too. We all get it. I had absolutely no privilege when I was younger. Now, I mean, there's privileged classes of people. You mentioned white men. Like, there's a large. I'll walk into a room of white men and go like, "Oh my gosh, how do you have so much privilege?" Which for me is so strange.
I think the idea that we need to start thinking, I think in the tech industry, one of the problems of it is that we do have so much privilege, like, for example, economic privilege, in the sense that, I mean, not everywhere, but in many places, tech jobs are very lucrative. They're very well respected. They're very, your parents won't feel bad telling their friends about what you do for a job.
Yeah.
If you switch to a philosophy major, that might change. But the like idea that we have a lot of privilege is very much underlined, right? And it is true, and I agree. And like I said, I also think we have the privilege of being kind of in a unique position in a lot of cases to decide how things are prioritized in the products we build, in the systems we create or perpetuate, Yeah. But at the same time, one thing that I think is interesting that I've heard come up more recently is that a lot of engineers, especially, right, don't necessarily think of themselves as, let's say, part of the working class. They think of themselves as somehow, because we have this kind of, at least, I'm coming from an American perspective, and we talk about like white collar workers versus blue collar workers, and white collar workers being the generally more professional, highly paid,
right. Doctors and engineers,
etc. Right, exactly. So engineers falling into that category, whereas people who work more with their hands or in factories or in what are traditionally seen as less prestigious or less highly skilled, I don't agree with that term, but jobs, that sort of thing is, I think, still ingrained in this tech industry. And I think one important change that I would like to see in terms of moving things forward is for us to stop thinking, well, I'm okay. I have enough money to pay my rent, and so I'm not going to worry about the other people that I don't see myself as being that similar to because I earn 5, 10, whatever times they do, depending on your economic whereabouts. But rather to see that we're actually all kind of in the same boat and that we are many in many places, in most companies that I've, seen, engineers are on the same order as, someone on an assembly line on a factory floor, in the sense of we are churning out, we are supposed to ship. And that is that is the definition of success. That is the definition of being productive, of being useful, right? Of being a useful resource for the economic system. And so I think the more that we see the ways that we do have privilege and that we do have the option to influence how things go, and the ways in which we lack privilege and the ways in which we are still part of the working class and we are still facing maybe not the same day-to-day problems, but the same kind of existential problems of why is it so hard why do I feel like I'm living my life for something else, for someone else, rather than that we get the chance to flourish. I think, politically, and we're not trying to make this a political podcast, but, I think that's something that, especially in the US, in Europe, in, the global north, as it were, we need to really start thinking about more seriously as engineers. And what's cool is that I think recently, in my time in the tech industry, I feel like I've, even in my short years in this wacky world, have seen a little bit of a movement in that direction. So that gives me hope on the dark days.
Yeah.
There's also other days where I don't have so much hope, but we don't have to talk about that.
You talk about those of us with privilege, with tech privilege, earning a certain amount of money and thinking to ourselves, oh, good, I don't have to, I'm not like the rest of them. I think that's kind of how you put it.
There's sort of elitism, that comes with,
This really bothers me because in my worldview and the way I live and the way I try as best to steward my privilege privilege is intertwined with responsibility, you know? Like
Spider-Man.
Like Spider-Man. Like to quote Uncle Ben, with great privilege comes great responsibility. And so I guess I was raised in a culture where I grew up in Qatar. And in Qatar, it's the wealthiest country per capita in terms of GDP on earth. And so it was very common. We'd go to like Chili's or something for lunch and someone would pay for your lunch. And you wouldn't fight it. You'd just be like, cool, I'll get you the next one. There was this culture of like generosity. And I was raised in this culture where also some family members, many family members would make it a practice to like give away 10% or more of whatever you get. And so I guess that's where I sort of feel like the more I get, the more I give. But I'm finding out more and more this is not the norm.
No,
and it's bananas. It's bananas because I see these people with enormous paychecks. Look, I know the US makes way more money than us here in Europe. I know this one person working at Amazon Web Services, $300,000 a year, cash. That's cash. That's not including stock. And
the upsetting thing is that, like, for example, in Silicon Valley, what have you, that's not even a particularly high number, which is mind-blowing to me.
But with that, they still feel like they don't have enough. I don't get it.
Well, and that's the thing, I think when we start to think of success as being, the number on your paychecks at the end of the month or what have you, it never is enough. There have been studies about this, right? That like if once you make past a certain amount of money,
$70K,
something like that, your increases in your salary don't correspond to increases in your general well-being or happiness or satisfaction or what have you.
That's so cool that you cite that paper. I actually know what you're talking about. We'll put it in the show notes.
If you know the name of the paper, I do not. Great.
The link will be
great.
There.
But I think so. One thing that's been really interesting to me recently, I've been so it's for folks tuning in later. We're recording this in February, which is in the U.S. Black History Month. So happy Black History Month. One of the things I've been reading recently is a history of cooperative economics in the African American community, which I think it sort of makes reference to a lot of other cooperative economic movements, and that it's interestingly often the folks who have the least privilege and the least economic advantage in the system. When I say often, I'm like almost exclusively, I want to say, that are the most interested and the most ambitious in visions of cooperative resource sharing, and that success is not something you hoard for yourself, that it's a lift as you climb kind of process. And I think it's really interesting that you give the example of Qatar, where there's maybe enough resources to go around that it's not really much of a thought for anyone. But I think it's interesting that also on the other side of the coin, when there are really few resources to go around, that's when economic researchers and whatnot find that they go around the most. The resources are shared and mutual aid and all these things that I think we also, again, the pandemic throwing a lot of our kind of economic assumptions out the window, highlighting how important it is for us all to see that, ultimately we're all in the same boat. We're all these weird little primates running around a rock that's hurtling through space. Like the differences between us are minuscule compared to the similarities. And why would we not be trying to look out for each other, especially as a species that, I don't have claws or fangs. I mean, we don't have any natural defenses. The only way that we've been able to survive this long, let alone become the dominant species on the planet, is collaboration, right? The fact that we can communicate. And there's a talk I gave that many years ago about like how I think code is a form of that collaboration. Coding and programming is, again, as a language nerd, I think is sort of an extension of that idea of how can we put our collective heads together. But I feel like we act on that daily as we write our pull requests and whatever, but we somehow forget that when it comes to the bigger picture of we need to all be looking out for each other. And so if I'm building a product that by its very nature is going to redirect resources from those who have the least to those who have the most, and sure, I get a nice cut of that. And so I'm doing fine. And I have the luxury condo in the big metropolitan city on the whatever floor and whatnot. And, is that winning?
Yeah.
Is that really winning? And I get that in a sense, yes, it is, especially when, you come from a place of not having a roof over your head, let alone a luxury condo.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if this is how we're doing things as a species, as a community, and it's at the expense of the very planet we live on, to say nothing of each other and the exploitation of our fellow humans, whether it's in the factory floor next to the programmer's room, or whether it's halfway across the world in, a globalized, exploitative industry. What are we doing?
Yeah. I hear that. So much of what you said resonated with me, because gosh, I don't even last year, I haven't said this publicly, but last year was the best year of my business, like my self-employed freelancing thing.
Nice.
And to be honest, it's been the best year financially for me ever. Absolutely insane. And I also in this year spoke at, I think, somewhere like 36 conferences or something. And there's 52 weeks in the year.
Yeah.
You do the math.
I don't need to. It's giving me like a physical reaction.
Yes. It was not easy. I spent, like maybe 6 weeks actually at home in the entire year. And a lot of it was in transit. It was very ephemeral. And it got to the point where, my friends, and I have dear friends. I mean, JV, like we've been friends 20 years, right? My friends just stop inviting me to things because they're like, yeah, we don't know if you're going to be around or not. And so you have this like dichotomy where I'm sitting on a ton of cash that I've earned from consulting, from speaking, from whatever. And so some would call that success. But then you have my friends and family don't even like know who I am anymore. And so, like you said, is this winning? It's not.
I mean, and I guess that's a personal value choice, I think life is all about...
Well, let me push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
Because you say we don't have any defenses besides collaboration. So is it a value choice to cut off that collaborative potential in the name of money? And is that adaptive towards the human experience?
I mean, that is a good question. I when I say it's a value choice, I think, prioritization is kind of the thing, right? And I think, and like I said, I totally understand people who want the economic privilege that comes with working in this industry, or especially, when people are responsible not just for themselves staying fed, but for other people staying fed, the flip side, I guess, is, again, knowing what we know from science, that money does not equal happiness, although it can definitely prevent a lot of problems that can cause the opposite of happiness. I am no way saying like money is not nice. And I think people who
I love money
don't know how good money is, like, means that they or their families have never encountered how tough it is to not have money, and I've been very privileged in that respect. So, but I think that we collectively, and I think this is part of this whole, there's this, everybody's all the headlines saying nobody wants to work anymore, and it's the quitting generation or the slacker generation or whatever. And this is like global. This is not just in the US or EU or this is all over the place. People are kind of questioning this productivity, economic success as the real measure of like winning, as it were. But even saying like winning, like hashtag winning or whatever, that implies there's a loser somewhere. It's a competitive analogy, you know what I mean? And so just, when you talk about flourishing, I like that a lot better, or thriving, or, other
thriving.
words. And I think one of the things that I'm finding really inspiring right now is like a lot of pushback against that toxic productivity, a lot of emphasis on the inherent right to rest, to not work. I mean, especially from groups of people like in the US, like, the history of slavery being inextricable from the history of the US's economic success. It's not a coincidence. Do you know what I mean? So the idea that no, people do not exist to churn out whatever product of the day is making all this money, whether it's a, SaaS product or a
database as a service.
Right. Or whether it's a t-shirt or whatever it is, but like, again, people are inherently ends in themselves. And without getting too like, let's talk about the meaning of life. I mean, personally, I think, it can't be winning. It can't be amassing a certain treasure trove of jewels and, gold goblets or whatever, and being like the dragon sitting atop all of it. And,
that's a sad dragon too.
Well, I guess the Lord of the Rings folks can debate about, the inner feelings of Smaug, but the idea being like, what is all of that amassing for? And of course, for a lot of folks, it's to provide for the next generation, to pass down wealth to their children or grandchildren or what have you. But if we also think about like the planet as a treasure, what are we doing? If I'm passing down a whole bunch of gemstones, but not a lot of like fertile farmland or, non-disastrous mudslide having habitable lands, what is that treasure worth?
Or even worse, if you're passing down like scorched Amazon.
Exactly. Or if you're passing down the actual gemstones, but also passing down the blood in the mines that were used to extract them, you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing? Anyway, sorry. I feel like this has maybe departed a little bit from what you were hoping to talk about today, but this is, I don't think that, a lot of folks say like, oh, I don't want to get political, or like, that's not, I'm just an engineer and I'm working on these technical problems, but I don't think that they're different problems. I think that it's the same problem. We are trying to build technology, to build tools to solve problems in the world, which problems those are and whose problems those are and what happens when those problems get solved, I don't think is a separate question from how do we put this component together or whatever it is. I think it's just one that there's not quite as much economic incentive to spend a lot of time thinking about. So hopefully this can be a moment where we all have a little think, a little sip of coffee or whatever.
I'm sure there's going to be so many people, at least I would hope so, that listen to this and don't immediately dismiss it as, oh, that's not technical, so I'm not going to listen to it. Because that's you're missing the point. The point being, a lot of us don't have, so, when I was younger, I was heavily dependent on, I still am heavily dependent on certain medicine, but I was more dependent on easy access to this medicine. I have it really good now, but like, as you know, right? And for me, it was work with tunnel vision to get this objective, to get this visa so that I get the medicine.
Completely fair and understandable.
And I think that's the vast majority of people who are listening to this. And so I don't fault anyone for not thinking as broadly as we're discussing it here.
No, we're saying this from a big position of privilege of being able to step back and say, do I really want this absurdly high earning career? And,
But not even that, like asking the question, where does this actually lead? I've had a lot of people listen to how I speak and look at how I look and go, where are you actually from?
Mm.
We owe it to ourselves, I feel like, to ask the question about our tech jobs, about the code we write. Where does this actually lead?
Yeah.
Sure, it leads to GitHub, and some CI is going to build it and ship it. Cool, but like, where does this lead? And you touched on some of those topics, and I think it's really, really important to do that. So thank you. We've identified a lot of like paths that are maybe suboptimal, a lot of trends that lead away rather from flourishing and so on. I'm curious, we're all in this together, as we've mentioned multiple times. For those listening, what are some like practical protocols that you've identified maybe in your own thoughts that we can use to sort of one, become more aware of the context, but two, do our best to cope with it? Because the current context doesn't lend itself to joy.
No, well, and that's the thing. Like you said, when you're in desperate need of a certain medication that you may or may not have access to unless you succeed at this particular interview or what have you.
It's like checkpoints in a video game.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, like it's impossible to make decisions based on loftier thoughts than like you're just trying to get through the day or the week or the month or whatever. And so, of course, when we are all kept in this constant state of basically, being scared for our daily survival.
Yeah.
And I'm putting it in super dramatic terms, like, but.
It was weekly survival for me.
Exactly. But even for those of us that are not necessarily on a day-to-day live or die kind of basis, but even if we're just worried about being able to afford rent in our increasingly expensive cities or being able to provide for the family members that we know are going to become our financial responsibility soon, whether they're our children or parents or whoever else, loved ones, or whether it's worrying about the political situation in the place we live in, whether it's going to continue to be hospitable to us staying there, or the environmental situation. Like, of course, it's difficult to take a step back and be like, let's philosophize about the real point of the tech industry. But
we should, though.
If we don't all collectively do that, like I think again, collaboration is our power, right? Yeah. That's our only and most important asset, really, as humans, I think. And so insofar as we can, again, focus on what we have in common and focus on what we want to see kind of happen in the world, I don't think it's realistic to say, everybody only go work for companies that are, not doing anything questionable.
Everybody go work for recurse partners.
Well, yeah. And I mean, even so, like there's financial motivations to pretty much this is just survival under this economic system, right? And so I do think, however, that for those of us who get really excited about technology and technical problems and interesting algorithms and interesting things, we also, it behooves us to also think about who would be using those tools for what, and are we working on problems from a scarcity mindset of like, I need to survive, and so I'm going to put my head down and look at this manageable black and white zeros and ones problem that I can actually solve that's in front of me?
Yeah.
Or are we at least from time to time also kind of raising our heads up, especially those of us who have the great privilege of being able to take a breather because we're not worrying for the literal survival of ourselves or our loved ones on a daily or weekly or whatever basis, that it really behooves us to lift our heads up a little bit and at least once in a while look around and look at each other and find ways to connect with each other, and not just to network for, funding connects or whatever, but also to talk about the lives we all lead. None of us are computers, we I think sometimes like to think that we are, that we're these very analytical,
also there's the systems that tell us we should be.
Absolutely.
Stop being so emotional.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I mean, we're all super irrational primates.
By design.
Yes,
and it's
exactly.
a feature, not a bug. I mean,
if you look at the way that we make decisions and the way that we choose, one technology over the other or whatever. Like, yes, there is an analytical component, but there's also a whole lot of not analytical components. And so I think the more that we as an industry and as engineers, as peers to each other, and especially those in leadership positions and, positions, again, of privilege where we have the luxury of being able to, say, advocate for certain directions, that it behooves us to think about the lives we all lead outside of work, outside of the industry, outside of the tools that we spend all of our time thinking about because we're economically incentivized to.
Because we bring those exact same lives into the industry.
Absolutely. There is no, this idea, this kind of movement of like bring your whole self to work. Like, yes,
that's not even a choice.
Well, the thing is we do it whether or not we call it that. And the thing is we either bring ourselves in this scarcity mindset of like, I just have to make it through this interview, this performance cycle, this feature push, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or we do it with the idea of like, I am actually a perfectly valuable, inherently worthwhile entity in this world, and I'm going to respect all of the people around me because they are too. I say that like, it's not easy. And even though I say all of this from my kind of, rational, whatever, like, higher-minded, self, like, of course, I also struggle with all of this, like, same as we all do, I think, especially in these systems. But I think that in terms of those practical, like, what can we practically do? I think focusing on the communities that we can be a part of, that we can support, whether it's by showing up, whether it's by gathering people for an event, whether it's by joining a Discord or a Reddit thread or whatever it is, or whether it's by getting away from the communities that we're used to spending time with and getting to know some other communities, or getting to know, people that maybe physically live near us or don't physically live near us and live on the other side of the world because we happen to have the amazing opportunity in the tech industry to communicate with each other, first of all, in person at conferences and things like that, if we have the luxury of being able to attend them, but also online, over GitHub, over whatever, and there's so many interesting things going on, in the tech world and by folks who are all over the world in both like geographical terms, in cultural terms, in ideological terms, so the more I think that we can focus on community as central to software development and not just
soft
accessory.
Skills.
Exactly. That it's actually like software is a community activity. And we see what happens when that breaks down and we have, I don't know, bad documentation that leads us to misuse an API or a protocol not being implemented according to the standard that some other software uses, and then they can't talk to each other. Like, those are all communication problems. Like, it's all a community issue. And so I think the more that we can focus on that, the more that we can find the communities that really inspire us and fill us with life. Like for me, finding the Recur Center, finding Outreachy, finding folks in the industry that I can have these kind of conversations with and not just talk about functional programming with, the more that we can see that as like a core part of our task as technologists.
As stewards of the industry.
And as people who are building the tools that, in some ways, there's that saying, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And we're building the hammers. So in a way, we are deciding or helping decide what people are going to see as nails going forward, So I think the more that we contextualize the work that we're doing, the more that we look each other in the eye, literally or metaphorically, and connect with the people around us who are doing the same thing or doing totally different things, the better we are going to get at seeing whether or not the tools we build are actually helping people, planet, animals, etc. flourish, or whether it's a backwards tail wagging dog situation.
Whether the algorithms using us.
Exactly.
You mentioned the scarcity mindset multiple times.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I I think that's a very powerful statement. And of course, the opposite to this is an abundance mindset. Like like you said, they show up to work and they're like, I'm valuable and I'm here to bring my best self.
It's very difficult. I find it personally very difficult to show up with that mindset.
I've been finding it easier personally lately, and we can talk through some protocols that have helped me do that. But how would you feel about the idea that it's very possible to have a scarcity mindset without actual scarcity, and so with abundance?
Oh, absolutely.
And the other way around, it's very possible to have an abundance mindset. For example, me as a poor kid, like with a bleeding disorder, writing code, because I did have that as a child. So yeah, could you speak to that a little bit? Like, does scarcity mindset rather, can it exist in all environments? Is it more valid in one environment over another? For example, is having a scarcity mindset with actual scarcity adaptive, or is having an abundance mindset in scarcity more adaptive, etc.?
I mean, this is not my area of expertise, if I even have one. But like, I'd be super interested to know if there's people in the audience who are sociologists or economists or whatever, anthropologists that might have a professionally informed insight on this. But as a person with a microphone, I will say, I think absolutely it does not have to correspond to the actual reality. And absolutely, like, there is a reason why we have evolved, like, from what little I know of the human psyche and brain and everything, that we've evolved to, for example, pay more attention to negative stimuli than to positive stimuli, because one might lead to you having a nice moment looking at a rainbow, but the other might lead to you getting eaten by a lion or whatever. Yes. And so, yeah, I think, of course, it makes sense to have a scarcity mindset. And in many ways, many of us, if not, most of the world, lives in a situation of scarcity, right? So I think, of course, that's understandable and it's justifiable and it is adaptive in the sense of thinking like, there might not be enough to go around. What do I do about it? I think, and I'm, again, saying this from a position of, I grew up in the United States. It's a very individualistic culture, as we know. But I've also, lived, we are currently not in the United States. I've also lived in various places. And so I've had the immense fortune and, grew up in a home where neither of my parents were from my country and neither of them were from the same country. So, that perspective is where I'm coming from. But I will say that I think this idea that, okay, resources are scarce and therefore I need to hoard the treasure and I need to be the dragon is not necessarily the answer to surviving scarcity. So again, like for me personally, I'm starting to learn a lot more about cooperative economics. And I find this really interesting because this idea that when there is scarcity, sharing and mutual aid and mutual support can actually be like that generous spirit can actually be the adaptive mindset that we need, even if it's coming from a position of like, yes, there isn't enough to go around, so we need to ration things.
But what you just described, sharing and so on, is I don't want to use the word symptom, but they're tenets of an abundance mindset.
Well, and so it's interesting, like, where does the line blur? And this is, I'm sure someone would like to weigh in. Yeah. But, I think it's interesting that you can have an awareness of, like, the situation is dire.
Yeah.
There is not a lot of food to go around, shelter to go around, whatever other insert basic needs here.
Yeah.
Without that becoming, I need to now look out for number one and make sure that I get mine before anybody else gets theirs, which I think, unfortunately, is what we've largely, as a collective, been conditioned to do.
Yeah.
In no small part due to certain individualist cultures and nations with massive militaries influencing the rest of the world's worldview. But yes.
It's also a product of, I'd say, directly capital. Like, there's and now what I'm about to say, I'm fully aware Australia is also a capitalist country. But like, there's such stark contrasts between like watching MasterChef Australia and MasterChef USA.
Okay, haven't seen either.
But like the USA one is just so competitive. It's like, I gotta take them down. I have a target on my back. They use this type of language.
Mm-hmm.
And the Australian one, they'll ask each other for like salt and butter and they'll like cooperate. And I mean, they're both capitalist societies, but something's different, and you can very clearly see um, scarcity mindset, abundance mindset. I think MasterChef like demonstrates this so well. I can from personal experience. There's been moments where I was young, and I had to, for those who don't know, I would often have to rely on emergency healthcare, and it's not it's life saving, put it that way. I'm trying to mince words here. Why? And so there's times where I've gone to the emergency hospital and I've needed medicine to stop my bleeding. I'm a bleeder,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctors flat out is like, we don't have any. It was improperly stored. There's none.
Mm.
And I'm sitting there losing blood, and I'm about to pass out or something. He's just saying sorry, um, and that was such an interesting exercise, because that is like the definition of scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
actually not even the definition of scarcity, because scarcity means there's a little. It's just absolute lack.
Yeah.
Um, and I had to process that at like 15, 14, 15.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point I was like, yeah, if I die, I die. And from there, there was little to share. And I was like, cool, if I die, I die. Give it to someone else first. I just made peace with what's the worst that could happen. And turns out the worst isn't that bad. In some cases, you die, and is that bad? You don't know because you're dead. At least this is what I had to deal with when I was a child. And I think that influenced a lot of my personal mindset. So I tend to operate mostly from a place of abundance. And I'm not comfortable with a scarcity mindset. I feel it sometimes. I get shoehorned into it sometimes. Working in tech, my managers at times have like done strategic performance reviews to like give me this scarcity mindset and pit me against corporate. IT is so bad.
When it happens also on an organizational level, right? Of, you hear about these massive companies. I won't name any names, so as not to prevent you from certain sponsorship deals in the future. But you hear about companies spinning up competing teams to solve a particular problem,
Right, yes.
and laying off the one that doesn't, do it fast enough or whatever. So, yeah, I think this competitive idea, and also when you look at, so something that I think a lot of us don't realize, and I didn't realize until I was well into the tech industry, is how much of our programming culture is military culture, right? So especially with the history of computing and the history of war and military development and
I mean,
national competition, in competition between nations being so closely intertwined, like so many of the words we use, the metaphors we use, the terminology, the kind of analogies that we use to grok these complex problems are from this mindset of only one of us can survive. Like this planet ain't big enough for the both of us, kind of thing. It's very kind of cowboy, whatever. But I think, again, like I think if we're really the problem solvers we like to think that we are,
then solve the problem.
Well, the problem is like, how do we work together to solve the actual scarcity problems of like, how do we feed 8 billion people? How do we survive the environmental disasters we have wrought upon ourselves? How do we overcome centuries of oppression and exploitation and all of the isms, and how do we like do things better than we've ever seen them, or than we maybe even at the moment think is possible? Like how do we think outside of that box? Let's think outside of that box and not just like
the box of your
of our one little small problem at work that we're working on. So I think I don't know. Yeah, again, on my more optimistic days, my hope is that as scarcity in the world, and of course there are many of us coming from very different positions of life, with scarcity of medical supplies, scarcity of a strong internet connection, whatever, how do we deal with that increasing scarcity? I don't think, seems like things are not going to get better for, things are going to get worse before they get better. So I guess, how do we respond to that scarcity without getting into this competitive only one of us can survive mindset. How do we keep ourselves in the mindset of the only way we survive is together?
And the only way we've survived historically was together.
Is together.
There's
exactly.
no evidence for individualistic survival of Homo sapiens on Earth ever.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just not how we evolved. And it's never been, I guess, natural to us. And so we have to sort of undo a lot of this conditioning that collectively has put us in this mindset of I need to make sure none of them succeed so that I succeed. Like, for example, we started talking about like my weird trajectory into tech. And I mentioned that I, was supposed to go into the medical field. So I actually started university, which again, big privilege, being able to go to university as a molecular and cell biology major.
Wow.
Random fact. And it's not...
Mitochondria.
Sure. Yes.
You're the powerhouse of the
cell. Exactly.
Yes.
But so it's not that I didn't enjoy that topic or that subject, but I found personally in the classes that I was taking in the sciences that and also I tried a computer science class and immediately dropped like a couple weeks in because I found these classes were the ones that were extremely, I wouldn't even say just competitive, but like anti-collaborative, if that makes sense, where it was sort of this idea, we're all going to be graded on a curve. And so I'm not going to share my study notes with you. And like, we're all kind of every person for themselves, because if I do well, that means you will do less well and vice versa. So I ended up going into philosophy and like the humanities because I found that those were the classes where everybody was more than happy to
collaborate,
share their notes from the lecture, or spend hours talking through ideas from your paper just so that we can exchange and think about things, and that collaborative energy, which again, I happen to find a way back to in tech or in the sciences, in STEM, through these amazing communities that really are focused on like, how do we make sure this is a safe space for everybody to come together and really collectively grow and succeed, rather than it being a zero-sum game. You know what I mean? So I think like the more that we can focus, if it is our task to somehow exist in a scarce situation, in a situation of real scarcity, but to not fall into that, I'm going to call it competitive scarcity mindset of that's why I need to make sure I get mine.
Yeah.
That like trying to keep ourselves aware of the fact that together is the only way to survive, rather than the only way to survive is for everybody else to, have targets on their back. So I don't have a target on mine.
Yeah.
I think, that's not very practical, I suppose, but, to think about things in terms of like, if I'm the only one that's on the planet at the end of the day, is that going to work?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's an interesting Gedanken, right? Like of like if the Hunger Games was a thing, and if
is it not?
Well, fair. But in the actual like Hunger Games from the books, if they didn't fight each other, if they didn't play, but instead decided together to take down I guess they did decide to take down the capital.
Spoilers.
Oh no. The whole story makes sense now. Let's just take it.
To be fair, I haven't read the books.
I
just watched the Jennifer Lawrence movies.
Yeah, me too. I just wanted to sound smarter. No, I didn't, but Leah did. But we should just take that and copy paste it onto the tech industry, because it's sort of getting to the hunger. Like with the layoffs and everything.
Well, and that's the thing. This idea of, and I think going back to kind of like what we're doing here, the fact that you as a influencer, as a content creator, as a whatever horrible word you want to put on it.
Thanks.
But as someone with a microphone, there are lots of people out there with microphones sort of helping folks, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but helping folks play that game to win, right? Play the game so that you beat out somebody else in the interview or in the promotion cycle or whatever. And so I think like one concrete thing that people can do, especially those of us that have the wherewithal, the privilege, the opportunity to talk to other people and, for in whatever sense, influence other people, even if it's just like talking to our teammates at lunch or whatever, to be able to further this idea that like one person getting a job, sure, that's great, and that's an understandable short-term goal. But to create a world through the technology that we build that enables everybody to have enough to eat and everybody to have a roof over their heads, that ultimately, to me, sounds like a better world to live in than one where I have to constantly be Hunger Gamesing every job interview, every time I, and I mean, this is something that I think those of us who are from underrepresented demographics in tech also know very well, right? This idea that you have to kind of fight to be valued or fight to be recognized, fight to be hired, promoted, put in a position of leadership, whatever it is, taken seriously even. that like, yes, we need to survive that system, but we also hopefully need to, change it as we go as much as we can. And so insofar as folks with microphones can be affecting the culture, influencing the culture, if you will, in the tech industry, I think it behooves us. I don't know how many times I've used that.
That's a great
very weird word, but I think that it is important for us to think critically about whether we are perpetuating the Hunger Games mindset or the let us work together cooperatively to
save the world mindset,
or at least survive this weird game that we've been put in.
Yeah, but look, the IT industry is made up of the smartest people on earth. Some of them.
Okay.
Right? Do we not?
No, I do not agree with that statement, but...
Okay. I want to hear why. Let me try and rephrase. All of human beings have roles to play. Is that fair? Like and for those of us in tech, we're well suited. I feel like I'm certainly well suited, not necessarily smarter or more qualified than the rest, but I'm well positioned to see things like the carbon crisis and build software to maybe help offset it. Because like I know the problem, I have been trained to problem solve, and I can write code to do stuff, to measure carbon levels, to measure is it going down, is it going up, and then you throw data science into the mix, you throw AI into the mix, and you go, what if we can intelligently something. You know what I'm saying? Like I see the pathway, and for those of us in tech, I feel like we can all sort of, if we with enough thinking, we can see the pathway and help. But we're not doing it together because we're being distracted by like politics and by systems and so on.
Well, and a lot of us are distracted by like
the real needs of
needing
life.
To pay our bills, or the bills of those near and dear to us or whatever, which is again completely understandable, and especially in this economy. But like, especially at the moment when we're seeing this contraction everywhere of like the kind of the easy times are not now, if they ever have been for a lot of the world. It has not been easy times for a long time. But the idea that we need to come up with new solutions so that we can solve even harder problems, like with, I almost think, I don't know, there's this 90s movie, Apollo 13, right, where they're telling the story of the Apollo 13 mission to the moon, whatever, and they have this disaster, and they're like talking to the engineers at NASA, and they say, okay, they're up on this spaceship, and they only have the things in this box, and we need to get the thing made for this into the hole made for this. We're using nothing but that, like, and that's what we do as engineers. We get the thing made for that to go into the thing. This is the work that we do. We solve problems using the tools that are available at hand, and we make decisions about trade-offs and duct tape and chewing gum and whatever. Yeah, exactly. And it seems like, okay, maybe we're going to have increasingly difficult things to build with increasingly smaller sets of resources, including time, money, energy, health,
clean air,
economic and environmental security, all of that stuff. Yeah. So that's, if you talk about challenging problems and all of us who are like, oh, I want a hard, interesting problem to work on. I can't think of a more compelling, more difficult problem for us all to collectively try to put our heads together on that, not to throw any shade on. Again, I have made a career of like writing JavaScript functions. That's, that's part of it, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah, it's not the end. We should wrap up, but
Speaking of endings.
yeah, we should wrap up. I want to know though why you disagreed with that statement. What's your
what was the statement that tech has the smartest people?
It's made up of some of the there's some of the smartest people in the world in tech.
Okay, well that's different, I think, than what you said before. That some of the first of all, what I disagree with partially, and this could be a whole other long podcast, but is I really don't like the word smart.
Smart, yeah, I see.
And I really don't like the word stupid either, or anything approximating either.
Yeah, I believe I said tech is full of the smartest people in the world or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a dangerous statement. I understand what you mean in the sense of there are a lot of people who are very good at solving problems in the tech industry. True.
Yeah.
Agree. The comparison with that, let's say, for example, again, coming from a humanities background, right, that like somehow writing essays about, I don't know, human problems that don't involve zeros and ones is somehow a less difficult problem or requires less smarts than what we do.
Yeah.
I absolutely disagree with. And I also disagree with the idea that problem solving is the only form of intelligence, right? Like, I mean, if you look into the history of things like IQ tests, it is intimately related with things like eugenics, racism. Absolutely. So everybody can go look that up. But certain educational institutions that shall remain nameless that helped to create the IQ test system were also in the business of trying to figure out how to breed a superior race.
Really?
So anywho, things like that. Like, I don't think there's any way to separate the sociological, socioeconomic factors that have colored the perceptions of who's smart and who's not smart from whatever it is in the real world that we want to point to and say, like, those are smart people. Yeah. So am I disagreeing with the fact that there are amazing problem solvers in the tech world? Absolutely not. Yeah. I'm just disagreeing with the fact that A, there aren't just as amazing problem solvers, if not better, doing completely different things. Yeah. And B, that there is any kind of inherent superiority to solving these type of problems versus others.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. One final question. Throughout our entire discussion, there's been, what I've heard was reverence for the human being, for the individual, for the individual life, people having value above and beyond the algorithm, right? Like, who's wagging the tail, this type of thing.
Yeah. Although I would say not just humans, but everything on the planet, right? Wow. The environment, plants, animals, fungi, etc.
Yeah.
I've recently just been playing the Last of Us series, so we know what happens when we don't take fungi seriously. Anyway.
We'll catch up about that.
Okay.
I love that game. I hope you watch the TV series also. So I actually, this is me probably confessing my own like sociopathy, but like I had to learn late in life that human beings are like inherently valuable. Absolutely nuts. Like when I was younger, I was evil. I'm convinced. Like when I was younger, I just didn't value people. I didn't kill anyone or anything, but I just thought, cool, this is a person. Why do they matter? They've not done anything. So you tell me I should rush into a burning building to save this person. Why? What's the qualifier? And the qualifier wasn't they're a human being. They have inherent worth and value just because we evolved together. The only way we exist is together. We are highly social. We're nothing if we're not each other together.
Yeah, and if you expand upon that, that's if you zoom out, then, if you think that essentially we also cannot survive without the entire ecosystem around us, without the animals, the plants, the fungi, that hopefully aren't turning us into zombies, that sort of thing, it's sort of, it's one level or several levels of abstraction of the same idea.
I had to learn that. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
I had to learn that pretty late in life. And then, sure, I fully live that way now. I mean, everything I do is for other people. I almost do exclusively nothing for myself. except hang out with you and talk to but this really for me anyway. But I where does that come from for you? And I guess by extension most people, this like reverence for everything around us. It's precious, it's treasure, because I didn't have it. I have it now, but I suspect there's a lot of people listening, a lot of the people in this wheelhouse of like, or in this rather hamster wheel of like, I'm just writing the code and I don't think about where it leads because I don't care. Other people don't matter. This painting doesn't matter. Whatever. I'm just here to get my piece.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's very rare, like pathologically rare, that there are people who really don't think anything else like
Matters
them
besides
themselves,
them.
let's say, matter. And I think it's very easy for people to see like, yeah, well, of course my family matters. Of course my pet maybe matters, or my neighbor, or a person who looks like me and talks like me and etc., has the same culture as me, eats the same foods as me, whatever. I think where we get stuck is expanding that bubble of who matters or what matters to
everything and everyone.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't like, obviously it's not something that is new. It's like it's a very old thought that like a lot of cultures and religions throughout human history have had various ways of kind of living out this reverence for the entire picture.
Yeah.
However big we were able to see at that stage in human history, you know what I mean? But I think now, now that we have the power and we live in this time where we can see the entire globe on like webcams around the world, we can drop into each other's video games and whatnot, from wherever, those of us that have the infrastructure to do it, that sort of thing. And where we can learn from all of the generations of science and of arts and philosophy and so on and so forth that have come before us. I feel like it's almost a symptom of something else going on if we are not able to then see the connections between all of us. And again, to see how much we have in common, like, I guess, so studying genetics, my first year in college, whatever, right? Like the percentage of difference between us genetically.
Nothing.
Infinitesimal, basically, compared to even between us and like, I don't know, a rat or whatever, you know. The geneticists in the crowd can weigh in with the actual fact checking here, but it's infinitesimal compared to what we have in common. And like, so, the reasons that we have to ignore all of that information and to ignore all of the sensory stimuli that are coming in telling us like we're all on the same planet, we're all interconnected. What happens over here affects what happens over here. There's literally more in common with me and my neighbor who speaks a different language, looks a different way, eats different food, whatever, than there is between we're basically the same compared to me and a tree or whatever. And so, in order to ignore all of that, we need to do a lot of work. And I think that's what, unfortunately, a lot of political and economic and, oppressive systems have been working on very hard for centuries and, more than in many cases. And so I think now, again, having this big privilege that we have of all of this information, a whole interwebs, as long as it stays up, for us to learn from, and like, and again, asking ourselves, like, what are we using it for? Are we using it to divide each other, literally, to create, to like foment discord and civil war, for lack of a better word, in different places with certain applications that may or may not propagate true things. Anyway, or are we using it to actually see those connections? And so I think that it's more a question of how do we come to not see that than how do we come to see that?
That is, wow. That is so insightful. And
that's my take.
Well, that prompts me to introspect and go like, how did I get so messed up? But we'll probably talk about that when the camera's off.
Lots of work went into it, from what I understand. And I am by no means a history scholar. I am by no means a sociological or anthropological or economic scholar. So I look forward to reading the comments from the folks who are. And I'm sure reading a bunch of other comments that aren't so happy with me not talking about functional programming, but
Okay. This was never about functional programming,
no, I
but
don't.
Anjana, it's been thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure just to
Always
hang
great to
out
talk.
and chat and hear about the industry and what we should be paying attention to, how we could be paying attention to it.
Just a one gal's take, I mean,
Yeah, but it's
like I said, I think it's a dialogue, it's a conversation, it's a collaboration. So
but
I
it's
just think it's something that's not unrelated to the
yeah,
ones and zeros.
absolutely not, and it's so useful, and it's definitely something we all need to hear. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And
Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks. Thank you for joining my discussion with Anjana Vakil. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. I hope you're rethinking what success means in tech, and I hope you're appreciating the interconnectedness of it all, how somebody from a non-traditional background can join this movement and hopefully participate in it for the better. That is the advancement of human flourishing. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then a great way to support it for no cost is to share this on social media. If you're watching on YouTube, then if you subscribe to the channel, that'd be super helpful. If you're listening on Apple and or Spotify, then if you leave up to a 5-star review and also share the podcast, that would be super helpful. Really, this is a labor of love, and it's a labor of love for the work and for the attention seeking, but also for you as the listener. I wanted to make information accessible from world experts to you. Thank you for supporting this mission so far. Thank you for being here, and most importantly, thank you for your interest in web engineering.